So welcome everybody to the Lead for Pollinators, Creating Pollinator Habitat webinar series. Our webinars are supported by the following sponsors: Hispanic Marketing and Public Relations. Visit HispanicMPR.com for interviews, presentations, and more. Beauty Beyond Belief Seeds specializes in wildflower seeds, heirloom vegetable seeds, grass seeds, regional wildflower seeds, and special use wildflower mixes, including their line of 4 great pollinator mixes. Shop for your garden and pollinator habitat at bbbseed.com. 2 Million Blossoms magazine will awaken readers to the vast diversity of pollinating insects and animals. This quarterly magazine will delight, entertain, and name those well-adapted creatures buzzing through our world. Because the more we know about pollinators, the better we can provide habitat. This quarterly magazine explores how bees, birds, butterflies, and bats enhance our planet. Subscribe today using the discount code word LEAD and receive $5 off the subscription rate for 1 year. Visit 2millionblossoms.com. OPN Seed has partnered with Lead for Pollinators with pollinator mixes created for beekeepers and anyone who wants to attract and support pollinators. You can get native seeds for eastern U.S. planting zones at OPN Seed. Go to the Lead for Pollinators website and select the donor affiliations page to order your pollinator habitat seeds. Select Support Our Cause to view featured seed selections, and a portion of sales generated from our website will help support our work. Live webinar presentations are recorded and can be viewed through our partner at Dove Audiovisual. Webinars will be posted 48 hours after the scheduled presentation date for pay-per-view. Missed a webinar? You can view these topics through our pay-per-view access. Visit our website for the recorded Login to Learn webinars and select the topic today. Be sure and share those with your friends. Our speaker today is Tamra Reall, a University of Missouri Extension educator. She is an avid gardener, insect enthusiast, and science outreach advocate. She earned a PhD in entomology from the University of Missouri and a bachelor's degree in horticulture from Brigham Young University. In her current position as field specialist in horticulture at the University of Missouri Extension, she advises local chapters of the Extension Master Gardener, Missouri Naturalist, and Master Pollinator Steward. Tamra will inspire you to add features to your habitat to support bees, butterflies, moths, wasps, flies, and beetles, who are some of the animals providing ecological services to over 85% of the world's flowering plants and important in 35% of global crop production. While the European honeybee is a significant managed crop pollinator, native pollinators are as important as ever to the future of agriculture. Providing and protecting native pollinator habitat, including foraging and nesting sites, will reduce negative impacts to these underappreciated beneficial insects. So we will switch screen shares and then we will welcome Tamra Reall.
Thank you so much. That was a very warm welcome. You're able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Fantastic. All right, let me just arrange things just really quickly. Okay. Well, I am so excited to be here. Again, thank you so much for having me. It's definitely a privilege to be a part of this series. So I do hope that if you do have questions, you will put them in the chat, and Michelle and Terry will be monitoring that. And if I can, I'll take a look. But anyway, we'll have time for questions at the end. So let's see. Let's talk about the subject. But I did want to give you a heads up. I'm going to be asking some questions of you in the chat. By the time we get to the end of this, I'm going to ask you to tell me 2 things. Something that you learned today and something that you intend to do differently based on what you learned today. So just a heads up, later in the program, you'll see this slide again. Okay, so as was mentioned, what this talk really addresses is that with all of our different pollinators, bees, butterflies, moths, wasps, flies, beetles, these are just some of the animals that help bring us so many different ecological services. Not least of which is the food that we eat. So every food in this slide is a pollinator serviced food that we consume. And how would life be without these things? So I know that I really do enjoy eating, and I really enjoy pretty much everything in this slide. So my interest is already there. I want pollinators to do really well. Now, pollinators also help a lot of other animals on this planet. So the plants pollinators work also create food for other animals. Insect pollinated berries and seeds are the food form that many wildlife species such as bears, rabbits, squirrels, foxes, deer, skunks, chipmunks, and many birds such as the mourning doves, waxwings, bluebird, grouse, thrushes, chickadees, titmice. There's so many animals that depend on the food that is produced with pollinators helping to service them. Also, the plants that they pollinate can assist with soil stabilization. So for example, willow shrubs and trees, they stabilize riverbanks and pond banks and stream banks. They're separate male and female flowers, and insects transfer much of that pollen. The plants they pollinate also contribute to stable plant communities and species continuation. For example, the wildflowers in a prairie. By pollinating these plants, the species are able to continue propagating. The animals that depend on the food produced by these plant species are also benefited by the pollinators as well. So very briefly, let's review what pollination is. In short, it's the transfer of pollen from one plant to another. It is important to note that pollinators are not doing this out of the goodness of their hearts in order to bring food and happiness to all. It's kind of a happy accident. It's a positive service resource mutualism that occurs. So who are these pollinators? We've mentioned them, but let's do it again. Birds, bats, butterflies, moths, bees, flies, wasps, and other small mammals. Most importantly though, it's bees. Bees really are the heavy hitters when it comes to pollen transfer. So let's talk about this some more. Why? Why are bees so important when we're talking about pollination? They are the main pollinators by far. So lepidopterans, those butterflies and moths, they collect nectar for food. Wasps, flies, and beetles, they may be pollen feeders, or they may just be accidental pollinators. So they might have been on a flower and then went to another flower in just moving from what they would be typically doing. And then some, of course, the pollen would rub off and pollinate a flower. But when we talk of bees, and we're going to talk a lot about bees, they are intentional pollinators. Not necessarily in the way that we're thinking of it. Like they're not necessarily saying, I'm going to take pollen from this flower and take it to another, but they are intentionally gathering nectar and honey. And when I talk of bees, many people think of honeybees. They actually get more press than they probably should, because there are about 20,000 species of bees. There's 4,000 species here in America, and here in Missouri where I am, there's about 450 species of bees. However, there's only about 7 to 11 recognized species of honeybees worldwide. And in the US, we have 2 species that people typically rear. Oops. So this slide, you can see that there are various bumblebees. You can see a huge variety of bumblebees here in the United States. And this is just bumblebees, so there's many other species of bees as well. But I thought this was an interesting comparison of just in size and shape and specialty for what bumblebees might be doing. So back to the honeybee though. Let's talk about why the honeybee is the poster child of pollination. Well, it's been studied, well studied for over 200 years. They're eusocial, and we've convinced them to take their colony and live in a box that's transportable. So it can go all over the country, wherever we need pollinators. Typically, they're kept in a Langstroth hive, so that'd be like this. Sometimes they're in a top bar hive. There are a few other different kinds of hives, but these are the two that I see most frequently. Usually, you might see them painted white or another bright color. We love their products. In addition to their pollination services, they make honey, beeswax, propolis. And their social lives absolutely fascinate us, from the waggle dance and their ability to communicate, where a rich source of pollen and nectar are located, to their sisters. Honeybees are so sophisticated and beyond our understanding still. So let's compare them with our native bee species. So 711 species compared to 4,000 species here in the US, but 20,000 worldwide. Honeybees are social, they're eusocial. That has meaning if you're an entomologist for a specific kind of sociality. However, native bee species are typically solitary. Honeybees produce honey, native bees don't. Some of them might produce some sort of a substance that maybe you could get away with calling honey, but not really. Honeybees live in hives. They can be transported. Native bees, on the other hand, most of them live in the ground. Some of them are cavity nesters. A honeybee, it really gets into a flower and it really works a flower. Native bees go from flower to flower pretty quickly, and they also travel farther to find their flowers. Honeybees are well studied. Native bees, not so much. When I was looking into this presentation, it was surprising how little information there is out there about our native bee species. And both of these are in decline. In fact, it's not just bees that are in decline. Insect populations in general are in decline. You can see on this slide, 28% of bumblebee species are in decline. 19% of butterflies in the US are at risk of extinction. That's huge. 50% of leafcutter bees are at risk, and 27% of mason bee species are at risk. That's kind of discouraging. So let's talk about why this is. Why are these insects in decline? Well, it really breaks down into three things: loss of habitat, pesticide use, and invasive species and diseases. So let's look at those just a little bit closer. So habitat loss. People have pretty much moved into cities. Big farming is where much of our food comes from. In order to grow lots of food efficiently, many acres of single crops called monocultures are grown. What used to be small acreage farms with a lot of variety are now acres and acres of the same crop. Even if it is a crop requiring pollination, just like you're advised to eat the rainbow, nutrients from multiple sources are necessary for pollinators to be able to get all the nutrients they need. Additionally, these large acreage farms break up the habitats that connect to each other, so insects have to travel farther to access food and return to their hive or nest. Let's talk about pesticides for obvious reasons. Pesticides kill things like insects. The invention of pesticides were initially a boon to farming, as much of our crops are lost to destructive pests. Killing off the crop pests allowed greater yields and efficiency. However, it came at a cost, a great cost. Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring, and it documented the adverse environmental effects caused by the way insecticides were used indiscriminately. Environmental conservation was born. DDT was banned for agricultural use, and the US Department, or the US Environmental Protection Agency, was created. So agriculture pests are a real problem, and we need to find ways to deal with the huge and sometimes devastating losses that can occur. But killing beneficials along with the pests is also devastating, and it will make a bad problem worse if we don't find better solutions. This problem is compounded by knowing so little about our native bees. Honeybees live in hives, and beekeepers can see the direct impact of a pesticide contamination event. Most of the native bees live in the ground. We know they're affected, but we don't know how. And death isn't the only way that bees are affected by pesticide. Sublethal effects, such as decreased egg laying, decreased production, and decreased coordination can all affect the health of the insects populations. And third, parasites and diseases. So what you see in this picture is not just a honeybee. Right up here, she has a companion. That is a varroa mite. The size of that in comparison to something like me would be like having a dinner plate on me. That's huge. And they are sucking out the hemolymph or bee blood. And that has to make an impact. It causes stress, and they also vector diseases. So this pest was found in the US in 1987. That's really only 37 years ago. So gone are the days when a beekeeper can set up a hive and then let it do its thing without monitoring it. Because the life histories of the mites are so are so closely tied to honeybees, the mites are not able to reproduce outside of the bees, with the honeybees cycle. However, that doesn't mean that they don't affect other species. These mites have actually been seen on bumblebees and yellow jackets catching a ride. Also, because of the viruses that they vector, they can be spread to other bees. So an example of that would be deformed wing virus that has been found in bumblebee populations, and it could be in others. We need to do more testing. We need to do more research. And that's just one mite. There are other diseases. There are other mites that are causing problems. So all of these things, loss of habitat, pesticide poisoning, and increasing pests and diseases compound into a huge and potentially devastating problem. Okay, why am I telling you all of this? The picture's pretty dark, but I have to share this with you because we have to understand all of these things. We have to understand what's going wrong, and we have to understand what's going on in the bee's habitat so that we can look at solutions. And guess what? We do have some solutions. There are things that we can do. We can do things even today. It's getting a little bit late, so maybe you might have to wait till tomorrow, but there are things that you can do and do it very soon. Okay, so let's get started. I often find it helpful when I want to talk about what to do to first talk about misconceptions. So we're going to start with confronting some myths and do some myth busting. These are the things that we're going to talk about. So we already kind of mentioned this. All bees do not live in hives. So honeybees live in hives, but most of the bees of the world do not live in hives. Most of them actually live in the ground. About 80% of bees are ground nesters, and then others might live in pithy or hollow stems, or maybe in old beetle holes. So it's really important when we understand where these bees are nesting, that we can leave space for them. So this picture is of the squash bee. It's a solitary bee, and while they tend to nest in the same places where they emerged, you can end up with these large aggregations. It's not a hive. It's not that they're living in a colony, but they're just living in the same place with others of the same species. These bees, just so you know, are not aggressive. If you were to walk in this area, you would not be stung, unless you're blocking perhaps the entrance, or if you're handling a female, because like all bees, it's only the female that can sting you, because it's a modified ovipositor. So by the way, these images, I'll share some images of squash bees with you, and they're from a brand new booklet that was published by the Lopez Herb Lab. It's available for download, it's free. I do recommend it. I will give you a link to that at the end. But anyway, so this is another one. Bee hotels are good for native bees. I've seen these bee hotels actually sold in the grocery store. So it's an interesting, people are trying to do good, and they can actually kind of be good. However, you have to do it right. So if you want to put out a bee hotel, you really either need to put a new one out every single year, or you need to have a way of sanitizing it and replacing the stems and things that you put in there every single year. Because what happens is this bee hotel kind of becomes a way for all the pests to aggregate and for disease to spread very easily. So it actually would be better, instead of doing a bee hotel, to actually create a better environment for bees to be in your garden rather than having a bee hotel. But if you do choose to have a bee hotel, make sure that you clean it out every single year at least. So Okay, so native bees compete with honeybees, and so they aren't beneficial. This is not true. Well, okay, hold on. Let's back up. Native bees and honeybees do use similar resources. So in that way, we can say, yeah, they might compete. However, that there's plenty for them. They work the flowers differently. Honeybees really get into individual flowers, and they tend to visit fewer flowers per flight. Native bees, on the other hand, go from flower to flower much more quickly, and they tend to visit more flowers over greater distances. Some native bees are also specialists, and they visit only one kind of plant, while others are generalists, like honeybees. I mean, honeybees will tend to visit one kind of plant in a flight, but they still will visit lots of different kinds of plants, compared to the squash bee that will only visit cucurbits. So native bees are possible, they can be considered better pollinators because they transfer the genetic material that's found in the pollen to plants that are further away. So it actually creates a greater genetic diversity when we're talking about pollen that comes from way over here to over here than from a bunch of flowers that are all in the same area. Do they annoy honeybees? They might, but that might actually be a good thing. If a honeybee is staying in one place, and for the flower's sake, having another bee come and kind of disturb it and make it go to another flower, that actually is better for the flower's perspective. Maybe not for the bee, but in the whole realm of pollination, it's actually better. Okay. And I wanted to use this as an example. So this is actually from that squash bee booklet. So if we look at this, we see across the top, this is a squash bee, a bumblebee, and a honeybee. And you can see at the top how many grains of pollen are deposited with each visit. So we have 63 with the squash bee and 171 with the bumblebee. Size, I'm sure, has something to do with this. They're big. And a honeybee is 69. Let's also look at the time that they spend with each flower. You can see that the honeybee, like I've been saying, they spend a lot of time per flower, 111 seconds compared to 76 seconds and 31 seconds. Then if we look down here, how many visits per hour are needed to achieve this optimal cucurbit crop yield? And we can see that a bumblebee only needs to visit twice compared to the honeybee and the squash bee, which can do it 5 times, or 5 times are needed. But when we take all of this together, how much time it takes, this little bee is able to do so much, almost 4 times as much. They're able to just zoom. And if you've ever watched them, you can see them. I have a video of some because they're just so much fun to watch. Inside of a flower, and they just go around in circles. And they're off and going to another one, and they can just visit so many of them so fast. It's fascinating, but they're specialists. So they are just doing, they're just working the squash flowers. And so you can see that that is efficient for them. And they are the most efficient in a way for the squash. All right, next myth, carpenter bees are pests. So I get this a lot. I'm actually an urban entomologist, and so I get questions every spring. What do I do about these carpenter bees? How do I get rid of them? And I tell them, well, first I ask, so is your deck painted? No. Oh, well, that's what's going on. So you can tell a carpenter bee from a bumblebee, first of all. Let's first talk about this, because this is on a flower, so it must be a bumblebee, right? Well, if we look at the abdomen, it's shiny. And that's the difference. That's how we can tell a bumblebee from a carpenter bee. A carpenter bee has a shiny abdomen, whereas a bumblebee has a fuzzy abdomen. And they also live in different places. Obviously, that's what the problem is, right? Because bumblebees are ground nesters, and carpenter bees actually will excavate a precisely rounded gallery inside a wood. You can tell it's just like this perfect circle. And so the easiest way to prevent this damage is to paint the wooden surfaces that you don't want them to excavate. So paint your deck at the top and the bottom. Paint the eaves of your house. Paint your fence. Paint all those things that you don't want them to be excavated. And then leave some wood that they can excavate in. So give them a place where it's okay for them to live their life history compared to where you don't want them to, and then paint so you don't have to kill them. All right, wasps are evil. Okay, so first of all, I know that wasps aren't bees, but I have to put this in here because a lot of people don't know the difference between wasps and bees. And they all get lumped into the same thing, and they say wasps are evil, and so now bees are evil. And so I felt like this was important to put in here. So first of all, wasps and bees are very different. They may look somewhat similar with their thin waist and coloration, and if they sting, it's the female that does the stinging, but there are very distinct differences. So wasps are generally smooth, whereas bees are hairy. Bees are mostly herbivorous, pollen and nectar feeders, whereas wasps are usually predatory, and they're parasitic. As for being evil, no one likes being stung, and some wasps can be very aggressive. For the most part, if you don't aggravate them, they'll leave you alone. The problem is when you don't realize that you're aggravating the wasp, or you come upon them unintentionally and then you get stung. And it can be very serious. So if wasps are bothering you, look at where they're nesting. You don't want them near your house. That's where the big problems come in when we're talking about paper wasps and yellow jackets. So you can keep them from building nests on your house or right in the near vicinity, but if they are out, let them be, because they're actually beneficial. They're eating other insects, they're eating spiders. That's their life history. They actually are considered beneficial as long as they're not stinging us. So they're not evil, they're insects living their life history. And I put this picture on here because you see all these little white things on here? Those are from a braconnid wasp. It's a teeny, teeny, tiny wasp. Like, you might not even be able to see it. Some braconids are bigger and some are just absolutely small. And this is a tobacco hornworm, which you might not want eating your tomatoes. I tend to grow enough tomatoes that I can share because I really like the sphinx moth that emerges. But if you see this, those little white things, those are your friends. That's a braconnid wasp that has laid these eggs on this caterpillar and will take care of it for you. Okay, so let's see. Here we go. There's a myth that if we just let nature take care of herself, everything's going to be okay. However, well, yes, kind of, again. If we totally were to back off, Mother Nature would take care of everything, but we might not be part of that picture, right? So I'm just going to say, take care of your property. Take care of the things that you want to have. Paint those surfaces, make repairs, keep the mulch and plants a little bit away from your house. As, again, an urban entomologist, a lot of the problems that happen in our houses is because people have stuff growing right up next to their house, or they have them growing onto their house, and that gives a pathway for ants and termites and so many other things. So keep them a little bit away from your house. If you don't take care of your property like this, Mother Nature will take it back. That said, look at the environment in your yard. Take care of your house, but in your yard, you don't need to manicure every single square inch. You can let things be. You don't have to worry about maximizing efficiency of everything. Worry more about maximizing healthy environment. There's a lot that you can do to take care of certain places, take care of you. It's okay to have some areas that are manicured, but there might be other places where you can let it be. And we're going to actually talk a little bit more about that when we're talking about creating habitat. Okay, so the final myth we're going to talk about, it's too late to help. And I want you to know that that is absolutely not true. Yes, things might seem dire when we start looking at some of these numbers, but there is actually a whole lot that we can do. And like I said, things that we can do right now. So let's start talking about some of these things. This is the rest of the talk, right here. What you can do: create more food, create more nesting places, practice IPM, okay? So we're going to plant more flowers. We're going to leave bare ground undisturbed. We're going to leave areas where leaves can remain whole and undisturbed. We're going to leave plants in place through the winter or cut them and leave those stems right there where the bees can get them. And we're going to practice integrated pest management. Okay, let's talk about this. I do want to note, I put this note on here. So if you are doing vegetable gardening, there actually are some different practices. Like you might actually need to clear some things out because we don't necessarily want some of those insects to stick around into the next season. So this is going to be mostly for maybe ornamental areas or native pollinator beds. And a lot of these practices still work for areas like vegetable gardening, but there are some differences between the two. I do just want to point that out. Okay, so in creating more food, the most important thing you can do is plant more flowers. More and more flowers. A whole lot of flowers. We need more flowers. Now, that said, there are some flowers that might be better than others. We're going to talk about that. One of the most important things when you look at like this flower right here, how it has this single ring of petals, we tend to like a lot of flowers that have lots and lots of petals because they're bright and showy, but they're difficult for the pollinators to get to the resources that they're seeking. So while it looks great for us, it isn't necessarily the best for the pollinators. So if you have a choice between a more, I don't want to say plain because I don't think these are plain, but a more simple flower versus one with a ton of petals, go for the one with fewer petals. Okay, so let's talk about other kinds of plants. Now, this is a really cool resource. So Grow Native, it's with the Missouri Prairie Foundation. They have a whole bunch of top 10 lists of different plants for different conditions. I've recently given a talk about site assessment and learning what it is in your yard that you have. You need to be looking at what kind of soil you have. Have you had a soil test recently? So you need to know that because do you have acidic soil or alkaline soil? Do you have areas of your yard that are more moist than others? Some that are just very, very dry, some that are you only have clay there. You need to know what you have so that you can be getting the right plants for the right place. Some myths with native plants. Just because you put a native plant in doesn't mean it's going to grow very well wherever you put it. You have to, again, pick the right plant for the right place. That applies to native plants as well as other ornamentals. So this, I recommend you check out the Grow Native site and look at some of their top 10 lists. There's tons, like it's just a place to start, but they give you a lot of different ideas of different plants that you can put in for specific purposes and for specific conditions. This one right here is one that I like. It can be aggressive or can spread rapidly, so you do have to make sure you're putting it in a place where that's okay, but it's this aromatic aster. And it's about 2 feet tall. It has these absolutely beautiful flowers. So if there are people that think that native doesn't mean bright and beautiful, well, they haven't seen these flowers. So this is just an absolutely beautiful flower that in the fall, it just is absolutely covered with these beautiful blooms. If you look at all of these different plants here, so lady's eardrop, marsh, milkweed, eastern blazing star, there are so many different choices. And for different reasons. So you might need something that's taller or shorter. You might need a ground cover. So there are so many different choices. Just try it out. If you want to try something new and exciting, there's going to be something there for you. Okay, creating more food. We're still in there, planting more flowers. Planting for year-round interest. In the last slide, I was talking to you about a plant that is going strong in the fall. Well, bees need food all year round. So these plants right here, these are crocus plants. They're not native because we don't really have crocus here that's native in the United States, but these are plants that are actually out in my yard right now, blooming in my lawn So it's so much fun to go outside where everything is pretty much brown, and you can see all of these bright yellow and purple flowers in my lawn. Now, I learned about this last year when I was talking with someone else named Michelle, Michelle Wisdom, and she did her master's degree and master's thesis on bulbs in lawns. Now, if you think about your yard, I mean, some people will have an entire wildflower garden, and that's pretty much what their yard is, and kudos to them. I don't have that. I have kids and I have dogs, and I need places for them to be able to play. So I do have lawn, which honestly is a great ground cover, and if you do it right, it can be if you do, like I said, if you do it right, it can be good. So if you're using proper practices and not over fertilizing and fertilizing at the right time so that it doesn't wash into our streams, there are things that you can do to make this actually a fantastic garden for pollinators and our environment. So in this case, I planted crocus and other early blooming flowers in my yard to now create additional habitat for the bees and other pollinators that might be out there. And after, if it's over 50 degrees, there are going to be insects out there. So speaking of pollinator-friendly lawns, something else that you might consider is having clover in your lawn. I have a lot of clover. I love clover. You do have to be careful about stepping on bees if you like to walk around in bare feet, but this is a great way to make that space more pollinator friendly. Now, it definitely changes your management of a lawn. You can't spray all those pesticides, and is that a bad thing? No, it's good. It means that I'm taking care of this area. It's low growing, and there's flowers, and they actually fix nitrogen in the soil, so I don't have to fertilize. And so there's a lot of good that can come from this. And there are other flowers that you can actually plant in your lawn as well. And some people really don't like lawns, and that's okay. But the majority of people do have lawns. So I like being able to share this with people so that they can see that there are other things that they can do to increase the flowers and the habitat that they might have in their yard. Now, if you live in a place where you have an HOA and they say absolutely not in the front yard, well, you can do it in your backyard. Maybe you can have a prairie area that you set up in your backyard. There are things that you can do in your yard so that you can still improve the environment. And then we're going on to creating more nesting sites. So we'll start with leave some bare ground undisturbed. So if you have a garden area, leave some bare ground. Around your house, please don't put mulch everywhere. It's actually, not all your plants need mulch. Mulch is really good for a lot of things. You know, it can maintain soil moisture, it can maintain the ground temperature, so it's more consistent. There's a lot of good things with mulch, but if your plants don't want mulch, then it's not good for it, and sometimes we forget that. But I also tell people not to have mulch right up next to your house, because then you're not going to be able to see the termites. You're not going to be able to see the other insects that might be getting too close to your house. So there are lots of places where you can actually leave some bare ground, and it's not going to be any inconvenience to you. It's actually a good management practice. Also, leaving areas where leaves can remain whole and undisturbed. So if you have a lawn, leaving your leaves might not be the best thing. It will kill your grass at a certain point. But are there places in your yard where you can leave the leaves? Like I have a wildflower garden that I can leave my leaves, and I can't leave all 7 cubic yards of the leaves that my trees produce, but I can leave some of them. And these leaves create habitat for many of our beneficial insects. They might actually have their eggs attached there, or they might be overwintering there, or they might be just under the ground, but those leaves are that mulch that protect them. So if you can leave the leaves, that's great. And leave them whole, or for your lawn area, you might have to chop them, but let me just tell you 2 things not to do. Don't bag them up and get rid of them or throw them away. They should not go into the landfill, and do not blow them into your street. I have neighbors who do that, and that's just not a good thing to do. So if you can leave them, that is the best. Okay, leaving plants in place through the winter, or you can cut and leave the plants with the pithy or hollow stems. So I know a lot of gardeners really like to get into their garden in the fall and clean everything up, but that really isn't what's actually best for your plants. So, or for the wildlife. So if you can leave these plants, just leave them there, then the birds can get to the seeds, and the stems are there for our native bees to get in there and to provision nests for the next generation. If you can't leave your stems and your flowers up in a flower bed, maybe you can cut down the first foot of the flower bed and leave the other ones. Or you can at least leave some of them, and maybe you could leave those stems right there in the garden instead of putting them in the compost pile. So you're creating this habitat for the insects to be able to overwinter. That's really important, and works out better actually than those nesting boxes, which is what we have. They can be good, but there are things that are better. It's better to actually create the native habitat and then just let them do their thing. Okay, IPM, Integrated Pest Management. I want to just go through this kind of quickly. I'm not going to go into tons of detail, but this is so important to understand what IPM is. So IPM, Integrated Pest Management, it's a science-based approach that combines a variety of techniques. You can see where that says that up at the top. We're looking at identifying and monitoring. This is usually about pests, but I think when you're identifying and monitoring, you also are looking at what the beneficials are. You want to see what's there. So this is a guide that the St. Louis Zoo has for our Missouri bees, and I think it's great. It's available online if you want to look at it. But back to this. So if we know what we have in our garden, we know the good, we know the bad. That's really helpful because we also need to understand the life history of them so that we can make sure that we can prevent damage from happening. Or if it starts happening, we know when the right time is to change that situation. If we know the foods that they like to eat, we can change we can change that if it's a pest, or maybe we can plant earlier, or maybe we can plant a different variety. There are a lot of different things that we can do. That really fits up here with this prevent. So some pest problems can be prevented. Maybe we can plant resistant plants. Maybe we can plant a little bit earlier. If we are rotating our crops, that can also help a lot with the diseases that are out there. We can use barriers to avoid climbing pests when we are using sanitation, like in a vegetable garden situation, or even in an agronomic situation. There are a lot of things that we can do to prevent a pest from being able to take hold. This is really important to understand what we can do to prevent and identify, so that when we do start seeing damage, we can evaluate the threshold of when we might need to start taking action. If it's below that action or that threshold level, then we don't need to do anything necessarily, or other than, like, we don't need to maybe spray something. And when I say something, please don't think I'm saying chemicals necessarily, or a synthetic chemical. You might need to put something out, like a horticulture soap or oil or something like that. There are a lot of things that we can do. In fact, when I'm talking to people about like vegetable gardening, chemicals, and I have to be careful, because even like a horticulture soap, that's a chemical, but I'm talking about synthetic. So that's like the very, very, very last thing. And hopefully if you've taken these other steps, you don't even have to get there. And like what I was saying with the tomato hornworm, for example, with my tomatoes, I grow enough that I can share. It's not a problem. I know some people will think, well, I can take that hornworm and I can take it somewhere else and put it in the forest and it can live there. Well, it's going to die. Just so you know, it won't survive there. But there are a lot of things that we can do to make it so that our piece of earth is a healthier place. And that's where I'm trying to get with this IPM. When we use these steps, then we're going to have a healthier piece of earth. Make sure that you're doing these steps. Identify and evaluate and prevent, and keep your plants healthy so that they're able to fend off any other problems, and so that you don't ever have to feel like you have to do more. Okay, we talked about a lot. So create more food, plant more flowers, create more nesting sites, including leaving bare ground, leaving areas where leaves can remain whole, leaving the plants throughout the winter, and practice IPM. Another thing that I didn't actually mention with IPM, it kind of goes back to this whole right plant, right place. If we're looking at bees, and this kind of goes back to that whole bee and wasp thing, keep things healthy. When we keep things healthy, they're able to defend themselves. So you may have seen a robbing event where other bees have come in and tried to take the honey from a hive. And that's another place where wasps get such a bad name. If we're keeping things healthy, if we're keeping those bees healthy, then they're able to defend themselves. If we keep our plants healthy because we've planted the right plants in the right place, then they are able to use their defenses so that we don't have to do that. But it does take work on the front end for us to do. Okay, so this is the slide I warned you about. Please tell me in the chat something that you learned today. And please tell me something that you intend to change based on what you learned today. I would really appreciate that. Things like that really help me, as well as any questions, of course. If you have questions, I want to hear those too. But I need to know that what I'm doing in teaching matters. I need to know what I can change to make this even better. So this would really help me if you will answer these two things. While you're doing that, I'm going to add one more thing, one more takeaway, and that's that you are not alone. So there's a lot of information here, and it could be overwhelming, or maybe tomorrow you're going to realize, hey, I wanted to do something today, but I need to ask a question. So I just want you to know where some of these resources are for you. Your local extension is available. So every state has a university extension. Pretty much every county has somebody that you can talk to. So if you have questions, contact your local extension horticulture specialist. There are lots of classes that you can take. So there's the Extension Master Gardeners. There's Missouri Master Naturalists here, and in your state, you probably have a Master Naturalist. In Missouri, we just started something called the Master Pollinator Steward course. And I'll actually be talking about that again in a couple weeks in this series. You can also follow me, little shameless plug here, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. I'm MUEXT Bug and Garden, and I'll put information on there that can be helpful, as well as I will let you know when we are teaching the Master Pollinator Steward course. And if you are a do-it-yourselfer and you want to look it up, I want to show you how to get research-based information, because there's a lot of information online. So let's say you have a garden problem, put that in there, and then add site:/.edu.gov or .org. I put missouri.edu in here because here in Missouri, that will help me get specific information to Missouri because it's going to come from the university. But sometimes Missouri MU doesn't have that particular resource, so I'm going to look at the surrounding states for that kind of research, or that research-based information. But if you use this, you're going to get research-based information. So definitely recommend adding that to your line. And then here are the resources that I talked about with that ID guide, and I took a lot of information from the Xerces Society and also Pollination Partnership. They have a lot of really great resources. I'm going to drop these links in the chat so that you are able to have them as well. But a lot of good information. There's a lot of information out there, and of course, don't forget your local university extension. And that's it. So what questions do you have? There's a lot of information here, I know. Let's see, I do see this one. If you left the stalks up over winter, is there a time in the spring when you can take them down? Great question. And this is one that I get a lot. I would say leave them up as long as you can. It depends on the species of bees that might be using them for when they might leave, when they would emerge. And so you just want to be cognizant of that. I don't know exactly when they emerge, so it's going to depend on your area, and so just just as long as you can leave them up, or cut them back partway and leave the stems, or remove those stems and put them in another part of the yard where they can emerge on their own. Did that answer your question? Great. Okay. Did I miss any other questions? I do really appreciate you guys answering the questions that I gave you. Thank you. This is really neat. I'm so glad to see that you guys learned things and that you're going to be making some new exciting adventures. Okay. So thank you. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Terry. So certainly, Tamra, this was wonderful, and it's always nice when I have my own things that I have learned confirmed. But certainly mine was the question about the stalks, because when I'm in an urban area for my habitat. Now, I don't know if some other folks are in urban areas. Sometimes the city doesn't like it when you leave too many things up that looks dead. So certainly with my habitat, I cut off the stalks at the bottom and I lay them there over winter. But there comes a point in the spring when I'm not sure if I should pull some off, that, and sometimes tree limbs fall in and things like that. But I have taken some of, just put them in the backyard in a big pile, but they're in the backyard, so that I'm not throwing them away and chopping them up. But there comes a point I have to get them off my front yard because of location and the appearance of things. So yeah.
That's absolutely right, Michelle. Urban areas are different, and I live in the Kansas City area, so I'm aware that what happens, like with my parents who lived in the country versus me here in a city area, it can be very different. And so that's why we do have to be cognizant when there's an HOA. But we can work within the bounds that we have to work in to still be able to at least do something. So right. I like what you've been able to come up with.
Right. Yes. And it's, even, and I'll be actually showing people my habitat. I think it's on the 24th of how the cycle of my yard across 8 years of its habitat. And I've had to do different things because of the city. But my habitat just loves it. I've never done a soil test. Because as I told Dave Reall from OPN Seed, I'm a lazy gardener. I planted the seeds and go with God. But it turned out wonderfully well. I mean, Mother Nature will, as you say, take things back. And what wants to grow where it will grow where it wants to grow. Because I even tried to plan, I'm going to put, the low growing things here and taller things over here. Everything moved. And I figure in the end it was because of the soil. They moved where they wanted to grow and it was the best for them to grow. So sometimes we can't fight Mother Nature. We like to plan, but Mother Nature will also decide.
That's so true. And the soil test, I think, is an important thing to do. But like you said, I mean, if you don't, I mean, the soil will let you know.
Yeah, yeah. I was looking through the chat. I know we did have the comment about carpenter bees, and sadly somebody said they killed more than they should have last year. And I have carpenter bees too, because I have the habitat. When you plant it, they will come. But I used to run a housing home repair program, and as you said, you have to take care of your house and your deck, so they will not use the opportunity for available wood. so that even when you have those, if you cut down a tree, I think if you save some of those big stumps, but put it at the back of your yard away from your house, and not necessarily drill holes, let them do it. I think but just leave some stumps, give them an opportunity to go someplace else.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if anybody else has any other questions. I think somebody started to type something and then hit the return too soon. So certainly you've got Tamra's information there that you can reach out to her. She does have some wonderful programs at Missouri Extension, and I think one of the benefits, I hate to say that word in association with the pandemic, but is that we are starting to learn from other people across the country. And by doing these online webinars and other presentations, we can learn from so many different educators. And I think that's a great pamphlet from the Lopez Uribe Lab that would be great for a lot of people to get. You're right, we don't do enough research on the native pollinators because they don't live where humans can actually maintain them.
Yeah.
So
it's difficult. The ground is a black box. It is very challenging to do research on any insect that lives in the ground. So my PhD work was with termites, and we were able to figure out how to work with them in the lab, but to do field experiments is a completely different story. And so when we're talking about all of these native bees that are ground nesters, there's some very creative people out there that are trying to figure it out, but it's very challenging. So I did drop all of the links that, there's so much more out there, but these were some of the ones that I referenced today, and I hope that you find them helpful.
Yes. Yeah, so just for anyone who's kind of new to using the chat, you can easily just highlight the links in the chat and copy and paste it to your own desktop so that you have them. So just go to the top part of the list and highlight it, copy and paste it, and you've got those links, and they should be active for you when you copy and paste it too. But copy and paste it to your desktop or open a Word document or something, and it will save the chat. Yeah. So I am so hopeful that people again, a lot of us are beekeepers and you want to plant for your pollinators, and it is that Tamra made it quite clear you've got to have that food across the entire growing season for them. So it's not just for our honeybees, but it's for all of the pollinators. And we can all reap so many benefits from all of the pollinators, and you'll get all of that pest control. I know with my pollinator habitat, I have no mosquito issues. So nobody is in my neighborhood. We have not had to have the city come down our street and spray because there are no mosquitoes. My pollinator habitat sucks up all the water, the standing water. The birds have helped to spread my habitat into the vacant lots, which are kind of wet, but not anymore because there's more wildflowers there. So we can improve our neighborhoods just by planting in our yard, in our little healthy space, as Tamra said, and then the birds and the other critters will help spread those seeds. Yeah. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to copy all those posts or the links that Tamra put in there. I think there's one more message. So
that's from me.
Oh, okay, yeah. So certainly if anyone there, I want to keep that up again, you can always reach out to Tamra. I'd like to thank Tamra very much for spending her evening with us and sharing all this wonderful information. Do check out her Master Pollinator Steward program, because as beekeepers, we want to learn about other pollinators. And even if you're a gardener, you want to learn about those other pollinators because they will be pest control as well as pollinators and give you a higher crop yield in your backyard garden. So I'd like to thank everybody very much. It has been a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Tamra, and we will look forward to the next presentation, which is Wednesday, March 24th, where you will learn how an urban grassy yard was transformed into pollinator habitat. Okay, everyone have a great evening, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay.